In this video we're going to look at how to make houses, specifically for Unity, and what we're looking at here is a game scene with the geometry for a house. It's not textured, but the important thing to do here is look at the level of detail group, and this allows you to have different scales of models, different sizes of models for different distances. So for example here, where we can't see this object very clearly, we don't need to see all the detail we would when we're close up. So here we have a good amount of detail. If I let go of that preview, we can actually just zoom in and you can see the door on that, and the window details as well. But the other models, if we have a look down here, are a lot simpler and don't have that detail. So even the handle, the door handle there, we don't need this in all of our geometry. So if it's at a distance, we won't see that detail. So we have different versions on different poly counts, all the way down to just an image on a plane, on one side of a plane. So this will have 4 vertices. The more detailed house that we have here probably has 50 to 100. It is working to a low poly count as we're going, but we can check that out in Maya. So this is Maya, where we have the scene with the level of detail for each house. If I click on the high poly house here, 670 vertices, and you can find this information by looking at display, heads up display, poly count. So I've turned that on and I get that information on the screen here. So it's got the whole scene, all the vertices in the scene, but then if I select a certain object, it will show me that. Now it is quite a high poly count for the whole scene because we do have this reference character in there. So there's a lot of vertices on that, and also the ground plane as well, which probably is subdivided in different ways. So they're on different layers here. So if I look at something like this handle has 300 vertices just on its own. So that is excessive. I probably would optimize that slightly, but for that rounded look, I've done that. And this door has a bevel on it, has a panel door, so it has a panel inside the door around this, which is nice for design. It hasn't got the finishing touches like a frame for the door to sit in, but this door in this case is workable. We have the pivot point down in this corner, so it will open as you get there. So that's an important thing for the objects that are close to the camera. So as we move on, I'm using the channel box here. The channel box we can get from this option here up at the top, and what that gives us is a display layers option. So if I turn off this one and turn on this one, the mid-res one, you can see I've got a very similar sort of blocking out for the house, but I've lost the windows and the door, and that reduces it to 244. So that's less than half the poly count. So that will mean the computer system will be able to render that more. I could in fact reduce this more because I have inside faces on these. I made these out of cubes so I could have inside faces, so you could actually walk into the building, but that's not 100% necessary in this. So I could clean that up and take some of those away. If you're not inside the building, you won't need to see those. So I could probably halve that again. I could probably get this down to 140 or 120, and that again will help the rendering. The low poly house is on this low res layer. Now this one I have textured just so I could see how I would do the UV layouts, but that's not necessary for the actual idea here. So for this we would just project the image of a door and a window onto it using textures. We'd use that, but we've got this down to 18 18 vertices, which means it's a very quick thing to render. There's not a lot of processing involved, but it does maintain the integrity of the shape. So we're going to make that fit over the top. So there's a slight difference in the roof. I probably would amend that slightly by bringing down that roof at the front so that it matches a little bit more. But the general shape is good, but this is just a simple cube house with some extrusions on that as well. And finally, the last layer we've got in here is literally a plane, so a four-sided shape. I've made sure I've taken the subdivisions off. When I make a plane initially, it's set to have 10 subdivisions in it, and this will only show up on one side. So our normals are facing this way, so we won't see the back side of it. And this will just take a picture of the house and have that applied to it, so we'll see that in the distance as we're working. So with 4 polygons, 4 vertices, this is going to be a very quick render for a 3D game engine. So that can be very far in the distance. So if we don't need to have that detail, but we just need to feel it's still there so we can have the orientation, that's how we would work on that. So what I've done here is with each of these layers, I've set up a Unity project, and selecting each of them, I've sent them to Unity, and I'm first of all going to tell you how to set these up, set up the level of detail in Unity. So I'm literally going through each of these objects and send to Unity selection, and I'm saving them out here. LOD 0 is the one closest to the camera, and we can see on this file size that is the largest file size. And then we have a reduction each time. Even the 4 vertices, full vertex object, the plane, is 21 kilobytes. But actually when the processing, the rendering, once it's loaded up, is going to be very quick. So we've got some quite small models, and we haven't textured them, but we can see how that works. So I've exported them all without textures. I didn't embed any media over to Unity. Now in Unity, how I've set this up is I've got in the hierarchy a game object which uses the child objects of each of these items for each level of detail. I've added a level of detail group component from the rendering menus. You can see right at the end there it's disappeared, it's not there. And I'll just run through setting that up from scratch. So I'm going to turn off that object so we can't see that in the scene, and I'm going to create a new one. So I'll create an empty game object, and this is where we're going to put our house models. I'll call it house 2, so it has a different name to the other object. And I can then select each of these and drop them on to the object there. Now I did change this. This is a billboard. There was 2 things wrong with this. One, in the scene it was the wrong way round, so we couldn't see the front of the object. You can fix that by rotating the y-axis 180 degrees and it comes around, but I actually fixed that in Maya for the next one, this house. I'm not sure I did actually. That's the image. So I have fixed it in Maya, but I didn't export it yet. So I've dropped all of those in, and so they are just showing up within this object. So what I can do is I can go to component rendering, and I can select level of detail group for that. I can also add it from here. I've actually typed in here, so this comes up with all the options we have. And so if I go to rendering, within that I have level of detail group. If you want to get to that quicker, you can type in here. If you know the name of it, LOD group, and that will come in, and it gives you the different items you might want to have. So if I go to level of detail 0, that's the object closest to the camera. So I can select LOD 0. I've got doubles of everything actually. Because I've got the other object in the scene. So what I might need to do is, before I do this, I'm just going to delete that object, because inside there we have the same named objects. So I'll get that out of the way and we can make this into a prefab afterwards. So I'll click on level of detail 0 and I'll add the objects I want to be in that level of detail. Now in the first level of detail I want the house, the door and the handle to be separate, so then they can be rotated to open. Level of detail 1, luckily I named them as I exported them. Level of detail 2, and finally we can have cold, but we can add another level of detail in there as well. So if we want to have a billboard in and just stretch these together, I can select level of detail 3 and add that one in as well. The object then should start working and should show me the different objects at different resolutions. So it's actually as easy as that, and that will just process that as it works out how far away from the camera it is. You can add fades in between these as well. If we want to crossfade, we can just pull that across and we can add the fades in to these items in there. So you can add that within that. So I'll let you play with that. I tend not to do that initially. I think in the background, if it just has a subtle change like that, you don't notice if there's a lot of detail going on in the foreground. So sometimes it's not worth worrying about. So that's how it's set up and how it runs in Unity. Let's have a look at how this is put together within the modeling package. So there are 3 elements that I'm working with. The house, which is broken down into the roof, the walls, the door and the window. We have the floor plane here, the ground plane, which is just a reference really. We also have a ceiling in the high resolution one, so you can block off the view to the ceiling. And we also have this reference character in there as well. So I'll run through the steps of how this is put together and how this is made slightly different for each of the model versions. So I'll start a new scene. I've already set up my project to work with. So I'll start a new scene here and I'll make a slightly different house this time. So in this case I'm going to start with cubes because I want to be able to have both faces showing. If I bring in a plane as well, I will show you just remind you of that, how that object will just hold on, just let me bring that to scale, probably about 1000 that dimension, 10 meters and 500 high. So I can see with this I've got this black edge there and a grey edge here, grey face. So that's kind of the scale I'm going to be working to, but first of all, if you want to change the subdivisions, you can go to the inputs, either on the channel box editor or see this one here on the attributes editor that we've been working with. Polyplane 1 has the subdivisions in it. So we're working with an extra channel this time, extra menu tab, which is the channel box and layer editor. I'm specifically using this for the layer editor. So I'll bring this up higher, so 250, 249.3 I'll just round that off to make sure it's perfectly accurate. And to put this onto a single layer, I go to my layers options here and create layer from selected, and that was selected. So now I can turn that off and on, or make it transparent. I'll leave it transparent so I'll get that framing. So now my cube is extremely small in this scene, but I kind of get an idea of how I might work with that. So again, from the channel box editor here, I can match the dimensions that I was working to in that scene there. I'm not going to make this 500, I'm going to make this about 250 height, and you're getting this kind of mesh sort of hash cross hatch there, because both sides are very close together, they're kind of showing up on each other. But in this case, because I'm using a cube, I'm getting a face on both sides. So I do need to give it a depth, so I'm thinking like a couple of bricks worth is going to be, let's give it 15 centimeters. So now those faces are separated more, I don't get that same interference between the faces. You'll also see there, you're getting that sort of black line coming over the top, because it's just sort of calculating the back face, this face instead. So I'll carry on with this anyway. I'm going to this is what I'm really working to. So what I want to do is then duplicate this plane. I'm going to name it first. I'm going to call this front wall, and I can go to edit, duplicate, and then I can just change the name of this, and that can be back wall, and I'll translate that. So I can do this using that triangular handle, but I really want to kind of know what numbers I'm working with. So I'm going to get that 500 here as well. Oh, minus 500, sorry. Minus 500. And that will push that back from the scene there. So by doing it numerically, it allows me to be able to match that when I create the numbers on another cube. So I'll just think that if it's 500 back, it's going to be minus 250 away, and as I go in and adjust this, I can give that a width of 500, and well, maybe it should be depth actually. I can either rotate the Y here and spin that around. I can see that does actually fit, or if I think better, I can add width to be the brick width and the depth to be the 500. So then that's fitting directly across, and I need to match the same numbers for the height here as well. And then finally I'll bring that across to this position over here. Now there's a slight issue whereby if I bring it right to the end here, I may get some overlap of the faces. So I will get this slight cross section. So if I get that perfect on top of that, then there will be a slight position where two faces are showing up. So I'm actually going to let it breathe with that and have a slight feature on the corners of this. It's absolutely fine. I have it minus 500. That's going to the center of this object, so they don't actually overlap. But that's, for me, that's a neater way of doing it. So now I'm going to duplicate that. I use Control D, but you can do it from the menus up here. Duplicate, and I will give that a translate X of 500. So now I've got a box, exactly what I wanted. So if I go back to look at the front, I can then name the sides as well. So right wall and left wall. So that's literally working with cubes to make that happen. Now I'm off the ground plane because the center of these objects is in the middle of the cube that I was working with. I'm just going to bring all of those items up to 150. Similarly, I can do that for the billboard layer as well. So now I've got all of those selected. I am also going to create a layer from selected for that. So now I have more than one layer. I'm going to start naming these. So I'll start with this one, the high res model, and let's give it a color, and then I can double click on that one and I can give that a name of billboard, which is what we call these single items. So then if I just put that onto transparent, and I can turn this one to reference and then the item itself, I can then look at the object there. Is that spun around the right way? Anyway, what I'm trying to do here is make sure it's in the right position on top of the grid. Okay, I think I seem to have got two different objects there in different places. So that has actually risen above the grid. So maybe I'd already adjusted that. Anyway, let's get those all into the right position. So let's just translate that back down to 0. No, that's it. Ah, it's 250 high. I got the number wrong. What I really wanted to put in there is 125, and that was the part way between them. So I'll spin that over, and yeah, so that is on the grid now. So I just got the number wrong. There is a bit of extra space on top here, and that is actually for the roof, because this roof is going to extend up from here. So that's matching near enough to this with the billboard, but we're working with that as we go forward. Neatly on layers as well. So at this point I can start to save my work in my scenes folder, and I'll save that there. So to make the roof, I will raise up part of this wall just to bring it higher, and for that I'm just going to use a function we've used before for the multi-cut tool, and so I'll hold down the control key and put in an edge loop around that. Now I would probably not be able to match that on the other side, so what I'm going to do is get rid of that original object there, which is on a reference, so I need to turn that back to normal mode. So that's just turned off. So T means transparent, like we're seeing there, you're not seeing the object. R is reference, so you can't select it. But in this case, I just want to be able to work with that, so I'm duplicating that again, renaming it again, and positioning that here. So in order to manipulate these at the same time, I can actually in this case probably just use the modeling toolkit and not have to combine them, but I should be able to just select both of those at the same time. So I'm dragging around those vertices there. So I've managed to get an angle on it. If I was higher up, I wouldn't be able to see all of those, but I just kind of highlight all of those. In that case I was selecting the bottom one as well, so you want to get it at this this angle here. Just check that you haven't got the other side selected as well. And then I'm going to take the move tool and lift that up to make the A-frame of the building. Now it is slightly forward on the building. That's kind of how I designed it. I want to have a sort of long runoff, and I designed it to have a specifically kind of sloping frontage there as well. So once I've done that, I can go back to object mode with those, and those are done. I'll save it again as I'm going forward, and then quite easiest thing to do here is you could work with a polygon plane, but I want to have some overhang. So on a building, the roof does overhang, so the water doesn't run down straight down the wall, it sort of drips off. So we will be able to see the underside of this. Now in this case, again, we know what the parameters are we're working with. So in this case, we've got 1000, but I'm going to give it 1010 because we're working beyond the end of the building. That might need a little bit more, but we'll work with this for now. Height, thickness of a roof, I'm going to give 5 centimeters, and a depth of 200. Now this isn't an exact science for me, so I'm going to do some of this manually. So like I say, we need to overhang, so I'm better to get a 1048. So I'm going to round that number off, and then I can start working with this in position. It will need a certain angle. I haven't done the trigonometry to work out the exact position of it, or the exact angle I'm working with, and so I'll just take it and look at it from the side and really just line it up as a best fit. And once I've done that, just expand it until it is actually the right size. And okay, I'm going to work with that there. That seems fine. I can just drag that slightly down and slightly along. That should cover that join down here, and also give me a nice fit to fit a similar piece over the top. Just check the front that there is enough overhang there. Actually, it's a little bit, that's a bit tall on the front there, but what I can do is I can take the edge of this object, just bring that down out of the way so we're not seeing that, so that won't be a problem now. So anything that's kind of poking through another object will look a little bit rough. So back in object mode, duplicate this roof, edit duplicate, and then I move that directly across, and if I manage to just spot where that center point is, and if that's right on the top of this roof line, then I should be able to make that fit. Now this back plane is considerably longer than the other plane, so there will be again some adjustment. So I'm going to take the scale tool, overscale it, take the move tool, and so I've lined it up. I have to line it up again. Could have thought that through a bit better. I'll take it through to about there, and just finally work that into position. And check how that is. So that's got a bit of a ridge on the top. I don't mind that. I think that's going to be okay, and I can tidy that up in the same way as I tidied up the edges. So more offensive to me is this edge poking through the back of the building. So just to fix that, I will select edge mode on that one, and I want that to go downwards only. So that's hidden inside that. If I want to see what is inside this object, I can use this X-ray tab there as well, so you can actually see through objects and see how that geometry is fitting together. So there is a certain amount more I could do. I could probably, if I was really making this perfect, I could probably come into this part of the object here and probably lift that one, because I can see on the side it's not actually fitting that same angle, so there would be a little gap when I looked at it. So in terms of fixing that, I can go in and lift that up so it's a nearer fit than it would have been before. Some of these things don't matter, some of these things never show up when you're actually in gameplay, so you have to take a view on what you're looking for in here and how much detail you want to put in. So this is kind of the end of making the mid poly count house, in which we would project or use textures to fill out the kind of the details, such as the window and the rest of it. So it's worth saving at this point and making an adjustment. So I'm just going to label this one billboard. So that's that one, billboard 1 for some reason. Oh, I have billboard labeled in the display layers. So you can only have a namespace in the whole scene. You can only have one name once. I can name this front roof, and you can see as you're getting more and more, it is so important to name these. And I missed my convention there of having a capital. Back roof. Okay, so all of these objects apart from one would make up our mid-range level of detail. So I can duplicate these, and what I'm going to do is mesh combine, and that makes that into a single item. So let me turn off all the other items. So now I can only see this one object, which is this one item here. So I can put mid res house, and by combining it, it really allows me to just work with that in a single object. Now it does leave these grouping transforms here, so it's got the information from these, but what I can do if I want to get rid of these and neaten the scene up, I can delete the history. So what it's doing, it's remembering how this was created. All the steps I've done will show up as nodes in this item here. So we've got this polygon unite, which is my last item I've done, but that's only got that information. It hasn't got these informations in here, which is the transform and the rest of it. So if I highlight that object, I can go to edit, delete all by type, history, and that simplifies it a lot. So we've got mid resolution house, we've got billboard 1, and what I'll do, just as I'm still working, I will create a new layer from selected. So create layer from selected, mid res, save, and make that transparent. Now I can also see here that when I make that transparent and nothing else is turned on, I have these two bits of roof that haven't been assigned to a layer. So I'll just select both of those and right click this layer, say add selected objects, and they disappear because this layer is turned off. So I can work with that there. So I've got the natural integrity of the shape here, high resolution one, and So I'm just going to add some other details in there as well. So one thing I had was a ceiling, and this I am going to use a plane because this is actually designed so that you can't actually go up to the top of the building. So we've got 1000 by 500, and we only need one subdivision each way, otherwise we get a lot more geometry. And then I'm going to translate in the Z. So this is the blue one. Remember, this is blue, here is the Z, blue is translate. So I'm going to do that to, needed a minus again, 250, and flip it so I can see it through the bottom. Rotate, no, wrong axis. Rotate it on the X axis. There. Now I should have looked at that because of the angle I couldn't see, but I'm rotating around that axis there, which is the X, and so I'll delete that one. And then I'm going to raise that up. I'm going to do that by hand, but it's going to be about 250. I can see that in there, so that squares off the room as if it's designed as a room. So this is adding more detail within that. So I'm going to, and I can also see that I've pushed that so high, I can see that just poking through the roof there. So I can see that what I could do is just bring that down 248, and that should be nested in there. I could also, if I wanted to, just shrink these slightly so that it's not in any danger of crossing over because it's actually physically smaller. Then finally, with that selected, I can add selected object to that one. Now the last features here are door and window. So I'll need to cut a shape out of this to fit those in. So I'm going to use booleans for that and then do a cleanup on this front face. So I've worked out these dimensions already, but what I want to do now is build in a door. So I'm actually going to bring in, at this stage, I quite often bring this in at the beginning, the human body to just give me a size of the door, just to help me kind of gauge it so that it feels visually right as we're going forward. So I'm going to bring that oops, got the wrong bit. I'm going to bring the human body over to the right here, right of the house, the left of the screen, from the content browser. I will then get rid of that. And just so I can work with this as a visual aid, I'll create a layer from selected again, and that's going to go T for transparent, and just call it human. Put that in there so I know I can see that. So I'm going to do two things now. I'm going to make a door and cut a hole in the this front face to allow me to have a gap, but I do need to create a door at the same time. So this is a cube. This is a 1 by 1 size cube. So with this, I have the center point in the center of the cube, which is something I'm trying to stop, because I want to actually rotate this around an edge when it's a door. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to make the size of it first. To the width of a door, let's give it, say, 8 centimeters. Height is probably 220. Go with that, and a depth of okay, I've gone height. No, the depth should be 8, and the width I'm thinking of should be 90 centimeters. So I've actually gone inside that object, So I'm going to change the color of this. So I'm going to assign a new material, Lambert, but I just want to have that an alternative color to the other. So it's not a big difference in color, but I can see the contrast better now as well. So now I'm going to line that up. So I know I can zero that translation. No, let's keep that where that was. 220. And I need to zero that one, which is where I brought that out from the scene there. So let's bring that by hand over to here. And the height of this is 220, so I'm going to bring that up because the pivot point is in the middle, 110. And just bring that forward over that character. So it's quite a bit taller than that character. So I could shrink that slightly. So I will make that 200 and then reduce that down to 100 here. Okay, so I was talking about pivot points, and this is an important thing to get right at this stage. So my pivot point is currently in the middle of the door, so if I rotated the door it would spin like I was going for a rotating door, but what I actually want is for that pivot point to be on an edge, and because I'm having the door on this side of the building, if the door opens towards that way on that edge, then it will kind of hide and allow you to see into the room quicker. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the snap points. I'm going to turn on snap to vertex, and then from the modeling toolkit go right down to the bottom of the menus, and like I say, edit pivot down here. Once I've done that, it gives me this gizmo here, and if it is snapping, it doesn't seem to be using the snap on that. I'll just fix that. Live, no, edit pivot. I want that to be live. Edit pivot. That should be snapping to there. Snap to that side. I actually wanted it to snap to the other side. Why it likes that edge and not the other, I don't know. Snap to view planes, snap to grid, snap to points. But the principle here is that that object now, once the pivot point's edited, can work like a door. So that can open, and I will make that jump to the other side. So it may be that it's too close to the other objects, so temporarily if I bring this forward, edit pivot, make sure I've got this turned on again, should be able to get that to jump. So I had to push it quite hard to actually get it to move at all, and really doesn't want to jump to that one, but I set it up manually anyway, so we can have that there. I'll turn that pivot point off. It only wants to jump to that other corner, so I'll bring that here. But now, once that's done, I will be able to have that open inwards towards the side of the room, which is smaller. So I'll straighten that up, and if I push this back into the position I wanted it to be, which is there, I'll probably push that back even further in a minute, but I can cut the frame out with this as well. So I'm going to leave that there, then I'll double click this cube, call this door, and duplicate that, because I want one that will cut out and one that will cut out a hole, and one which will actually be the door. So I'll just expand one out, make sure, so I'm going to say X-ray, I can see through. So that one is going all the way through that cube. So I'll select the first cube where I want to have the hole put in, and the object that will be the hole, and I can do a Boolean difference, and that will have cut out a hole. I'll just turn off the X-ray and push the door into place. So the door will be inside the edge there, it won't be outside of the building. It's got a, again, like I was talking about with the other aspects, but we can open that door and have the see inside the room. So there is a bit more detail I'm going to put on this door. So that's the front wall here has been, so the actual door 1 has become a reference to the front wall there. I will now delete by type history for that feature, and that brings that down to front wall 1, and that is just one object now. So I will need to check the geometry on that. So it's going to have removed quads on this. So I'm going to add in some slightly more complex geometry. I'm just going to check the position of this door. I want that to be quite central in this scene, in the door frame there. So I'll bring that back so it's inset from the door. To create a high resolution door, I'm going to focus on the one that I have now, and I'm going to make a duplicate of that. Then I can have one which is the low resolution as well. So I'm starting with a single door which has 8 vertices and 6 faces. So as I add more detail to this for the close-up, I can work on this version. So I can keep that one for the mid-level version, this one for the high definition version. So I'm going to start working the faces. If I right click it, I can select faces, very similar to how I do it in the modeling toolkit here. I'll just select that front face because that's the one I'm mainly going to use. I'm going to select extrude from the toolkit here, and I'm just going to bring this in so I can have a panel for the door as well. So it's a panel door, one which has a sort of thicker outside of the door to the inside. So they kind of have a, it's kind of like a bevel, but it's a little tricky to do that with the bevel tool. So I will just do these 3 extrusions to bring that in. Once I've done that, I will move over to edge mode, and I just want to double click that edge loop, left click, double click, and so what I want to do is I just want to pull that in slightly. So if I turn that around, press W for the moves tool, I can push that back. If I push it too far, it will go through the other elements, but you can see what I'm doing there. And that should, it's kind of not showing up particularly well, but maybe I pushed it too far, but it seems to be going slightly behind something there, and that might be just the light, but I seem to have 2 faces. That'll be it. So this door is for the mid-resolution item, which should be hidden. So once I hide that, to even turn the transparency off, then I can actually see that's coming through there as well. So I'll just make sure it's on sharp mode. You can see it's got a, pushed it too far because I was on the so I wasn't seeing it. So I'll just do that again. I'll also turn this human off as well because I've got the scale for that. I don't need to do that anymore. So I'll double click that again and just bring it slightly forward, and so that'll just create that. I've only got one edge there, one edge, so I'll just release that, take that back. So I want to make sure I double click and take all of them, and just get a slight bevel on that. Then also for this I'll need a door handle, only for the close-up. I'm not going to use it in the mid resolution one, and I am going to do a very traditional doorknob, and I'm just going to increase the radius of this to about 3 centimeters, so that will give me a 6 centimeter diameter, and I will press F to focus on that and bring that closer to the door. Now the door handle would come on the right side if it's pivoting on the opposite side, and to make this work I'm just going to make a few changes to the sphere. So I'm going to look at the profile here. I'm going to marquee and select those faces there. Now for this you need to make sure you have camera based selection off, because I'm selecting some aspects that are behind the scene, so I can pull that out, and that will allow me to have that shaft that can go through the door handle. I'll scale that down. That can actually be quite small, so I'll actually make that top one fit that as well, so I'll just bring that down. So that's going to disappear into the door, and then I'm going to use a soft selection and shrink these aspects here, so we can make it so that they flatten off, and also that they are a bit closer in, so you have that kind of hole behind the handle so that you can grip around it to catch it. And probably also just bring those round slightly to be more rounded, and that will do. I don't know if I go back to object mode, focus on the handle, and then it's a matter of just placing it in the right position. So line that up and rotate that around so it fits on. So that's probably a little far away. It just has to have the illusion of having a door handle, and I'll work with that there. So that gives me the higher resolution detail on that one. So the door high res, door mid res, I will just mid resolution. Now this plane was the ceiling, and I'm assuming that hasn't been added to the high resolution group there, the layer and selected objects, nor will this door and handle, so I'll just rename that one handle. So those two also be added to the high res layer, so I'll just check that by turning it on and off. That front wall also needs to go in to that one, and just keeps the work neat. Now I'm not going to do the window in this case. We had a window before which did have the frame, but you can do a similar operation with that as well. You will need to tidy up the edges, the edge loops on the front wall here to add in another boolean. So use the multi-cut tool and add in geometry as you need it for that. So for now I'm just adding in some extra quads around here. also going to put it onto ghosting so I can actually see that a little better. So I'm going to bring that around and just join these up, and that will just clean up the geometry, so it works like, oh, I didn't get that one, missed. So that will work in quads. Press enter. I need to go around this edge here. Right. That one. Best to do it from the other side. And that should have tidied that up. So that vertex there is a bit messy. I placed that slightly wrong. I would do that again if I had more time. But for the sake of the demonstration, we can go and move that. If I could move to the select tool and just move that so it's neater there. So one last one would be to go around the edges from here, just to make that work as a quad. And yeah, so that's cleaned up that geometry there, and that would allow us now to add another boolean in there, which is essentially a very similar process to what we've just done there. I would put a frame in around it, just build out of cubes. When I did the window earlier, I used a plane for the window, and that was given a blend texture with some transparency, so that was slightly reflective, and these are just cubes around there, and this cube here had the bottom face pulled out to make the window ledge. So that's how that works. So this is a simple boolean, and some of the geometry's fixed there. I don't think it was as neat, the fixing the geometry in that one, but that's essentially adding in a window. So now it's the process of taking this and just bringing a very low resolution one in. So we've got the billboard, we've got the high res and mid res one, and we're now going to make a low resolution one. And this one I'm going to do just from a cube. Sometimes people like to start on this one. But I'm going to get an outline here, and I really just want this shape from a cube, so I can bring a new cube in. I know the dimensions of it, so I'm going to start with the 1000 and 500. Also, the height initially was 250 and raise it up by 125 and push it back 125 and no, push it back by 250 minus 250. And for this I will take the multi-cut tool and press Control, just bring in an edge loop there, and once that edge loop's done I can then lift that to replicate the roof. Essentially that would probably do for this, but I can also turn soft selection off. I can see that better with what I'm selecting. I can also bring make an extrusion to bring those out slightly. I'll click on this to give it a world center and just extend that so that it is matching where the other roof is, about there. and then just want to make that slightly more there, and then also just bring those edges here. No, I might do these one at a time actually. This one, extrude, and that down over the front. Try and match that lip. So this is really isn't going to be seen in detail. So it's just so that I get that in line, so that it actually catches the light in the same way. But that's coming down to about here. And that's it. Everything else will be done with textures within this. A slight error on that. I should really extrude that as well when I at the same time, but I'm not going to go over that again. I would probably redo that and just bring those down to match, but it actually will work. So that's my low res model, and if I turn the X-ray off, you can see how that looks. So with 22 vertices, I am getting that to work the same way. So I'll just make sure that gets added to this part here. Okay, so now I'm ready to export this. That's all the modeling done. I would texture it, and like I say, add the window. But the low resolution one and the middle resolution one are pretty much done. The billboard's done. The low resolution one's definitely done. I am going now to combine the high resolution mesh, and I'll combine everything apart from the door and the handle. In order to get the handle to follow the door, at the moment it just floats when it's there. I'm going to select them both. I selected the handle first there, and then the door. I'm going to press P for parent, and this puts the handle inside, or as a part underneath the hierarchy of the door, and now that will stick to the door as it opens and closes, and that means that they will just work together. You can also work with the middle click. So if I hold down the middle click, here I've got the mid resolution door, I can middle click that and drop it onto the mid resolution house. This is another way of working. So now finally I want to combine the high res elements. So we've got front wall, ceiling, back roof, front roof, right, left, back wall. So I want to combine all of those, and then I can add the door and the handle to that as well. So I'll combine that, and that becomes one piece. So I've got high res house, and middle click the door and drop it on. So I still have these elements in there. I'm going to just delete all by type history, and that brings it all down to a much easier, or much simpler system without history, without any knowledge of how this has been put together. So it's a cleaner file. So that's ready to export now. So what I can do, I'll just go through each of these. I won't be able to see them as I do that, but I can select objects in this scene or that I'm viewing, and actually I haven't got that. As I combined it, I do need to add selected objects again. So right click, select objects, so that's another check for me, and then I can just send to Unity selection, and house demo LOD 0. So LOD 0, that'll be the highest resolution one. The mid resolution one, just make sure I can see that one. I don't think I did the door on that one, so I don't need to actually add the door, but I might add that in later. So I will keep that. Select objects and send to Unity. Level of detail 1. And low res. Export. Send to Unity selection. Level of detail 2. And my billboard, which actually is literally just a plane. So I will need to make an image to fit that plane. So I'll do that in a second. And send to Unity selection. House demo, level of detail 3. So I had that saving by size, so I can see how they're all different. Now, to finally get the image that I will project onto that final piece there, the billboard, I will actually go into a different view. I'll go to the front view. I can see that as a flat image there, and I will render this. So what I'm going to do is render current frame. It's actually an Arnold renderer, but I'm going to do this in Maya software, and that saves out the image that I can attach to the billboard. So then I house billboard 2, just save that as this one. In fact, I'll just save it in the project here, and that's what will show up within Unity. So within my project, I can find my images folder, find the house that I've just saved, it's the one without the window, and I can copy that and paste that into my assets folder here. So now when I'm in, now I'm here, I can use this. So again, just to recap, I can create an empty object, which is a null node. So and I can, if I just hide that one, and then I'm going to drop these items into that. So I've got another hierarchy. So this is just like parenting in Maya that we've just seen, and each of those is raised up slightly. So I'm just going to check the positioning of that. It just seems above the ground, which is a bit odd. So I'll just zero out the position of each of these. And that means they will match. They probably would have matched anyway, but I just want them to be set on the origin definitely off for some reason. That one is the wrong way around, as normal. Just zero that out. Okay, all together, and then that one I'm going to spin 180 degrees, so it's showing up, and I'm just going to drop the billboard onto that. So that's the house image. Within my shader I have opaque or cutout. If I do cutout, that can take the alpha channel off that, and the image wasn't quite fitting the item, so I'll just spin that round, so all on 90, and just manually by hand I'm going to scale that so it just fits a bit better from there. But that will represent the same thing. There. And then to separate out these objects, I will add the component level of detail group. If you haven't got that on, it's from rendering and LOD group. We'll add in the items house demo, house demo level of detail 1, house level of detail 2, and insert another one before for the billboards. And you can set how close to the camera they are when they change. Level of detail 3 just comes in there. And now when we preview that, drag the camera along, and you'll see the detail coming there. An extra edit on that would give you a door on that, but we'll add the textures in afterwards. So that's it, and that will run and optimize your scenes